Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown here in Langley, British Columbia. Beautiful Langley. I have voted. By the time this is released, we will know the results of the election. Matthew, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm just figuring out. There we go. You were really loud in my ears, Michael. Oh. Trying to figure out how to turn down my earphones a little bit. I'm good. I just had some pizza with Jamie Parker, who's a listener and in the yard with her son and his son's girlfriend. Yep.
Well, that's very nice. So you were out with Jamie Parker and her son?
Yep. And his girlfriend. And yeah, we kind of met sort of via the show. And she lives in Ontario. She comes out to see him and we meet up to have lunch usually.
Well, let's get on with this one. This one happens in my hometown, near my hometown, Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. So onward and upward.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
On a humid August morning in 1873, the quiet, tight-knit community of Baker's Settlement in Lunenburg County, Nova Scotia was shattered by a crime so shocking that it would echo for generations. This is the story of Mary Ann Frauzel Mailman, a woman described by her contemporaries as strikingly beautiful and, by all accounts, a devoted mother, whose life ended violently at the hands of her husband, Peter Mailman. The murder and its aftermath would become one of the most infamous cases in the province's history, both for its brutality and for the chilling window it offered into the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. This is Dark Poutine episode 365, Beneath the Roots, the murder of Mary Ann Frauzel Mailman. Baker's Settlement is a small community just 14 kilometers east of Bridgewater, where I grew up. Before Europeans arrived, the Mi'kmaq lived on the land. They hunted, fished, and gathered across the region. Rivers and forests provided food and shelter. The nearby Pigeonooskak River, later named the Lahave, was key to their movement and known for its salmon. Seasonal camps existed close to today's settlements. European settlers began arriving in the 1700s. Most came from Germany, Switzerland, and France. They were part of the foreign Protestant migration. They settled around Lunenburg and expanded inland. By the early 1800s, some families moved to what became Baker's Settlement. The community was named after the Baker family, who were among the first Europeans to clear land and farm there. By the mid-1800s, Several farms were well established. The land, though rocky in parts, could support crops and animals. Families grew potatoes, oats, and turnips. They raised cows, pigs, and chickens for food and trade. A schoolhouse was built to serve local children. Church services were held in homes or small buildings at first. Later, a proper church stood as a gathering place. Social events and seasonal gatherings brought people together. Logging and sawmills became important. Men worked in the woods during the winter months. Firewood and lumber helped sustain families and brought income. Small mills along streams processed the timber. As a youngster, I played in the ruins of a few of these mills long since abandoned. The community stayed small but strong. Most residents knew each other. Hard work and shared effort kept it going.
In small communities like this, trust is currency, right?
Yep, 100%. Yep.
And reputation is sort of everything in a lot of ways. And I think, this is way, you're not quite this old, Mike. This happened
1873.
Just a few years before you.
More than 100?
Yeah, and I just imagine it probably, this story probably, didn't just break the family and shattered that sort of shared sense of safety that this small... it's small when you lived there. Imagine back then, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, Baker Settlement is still pretty small. But yeah, it's one of those communities where back in those days, everybody would have been relying on somebody else for something.
Right. Yeah.
Like everybody would have been bringing something to the table, and somebody going missing from that chain of people would have a huge impact.
Yeah.
In the 19th century, Nova Scotia was a place where murder was a rarity. People in places like Baker Settlement had strong ties, relying on one another for survival, and violent crime was almost unheard of. As J.W. Longley, Esquire, the special reporter who later covered the trial, wrote, quote, "Murders are rare in this dominion. We are blessed with a state of society which renders crime of this revolting character almost impossible," end quote. Yet with the events of August 11, 1873, the community was forced to confront the unthinkable: a wife murdered, suspicion falling squarely on her husband, and a family torn apart. Much of what follows comes directly from Longley's coverage of Peter Mailman's subsequent trial after Mary Ann's murder. Mary Ann Frauzel Mailman and Peter Mailman were of German descent. They shared a common background in the region, and their families had long-standing roots in the local farming communities. Mary Ann's maiden name was Frauzel, and she was described by those who knew her as a woman of striking beauty with a pleasant and industrious character. The couple resided on Pleasant River Road, a modest homestead surrounded by the woods and fields typical of the area. Mary Ann was born in 1826 in nearby Waterloo in Lunenburg County, and Peter was born the same year in Lunenburg County, but his exact place of birth was unrecorded. He had at least two brothers living nearby in Greywood, suggesting that the Mailman family was relatively established in the area. Peter Mailman was known among neighbors as a man with a quick temper and a difficult disposition. He liked to drink, perhaps a little too much. They had several children together. Their eldest daughter, Angelina, was 17 years old at the time of the murder. Other children included Teresa, who was 11, and a younger son, Peter, called Sonny, who was still a child when his mother died. The family's daily life revolved around farming and household chores, with Mary Ann managing the home. The family's financial situation was modest, and Peter often worked the land to provide for his wife and children. Mary Ann was known to be reliable and attentive, and neighbors recalled her as generally kind and hard-working. She and her children occasionally visited neighbors, and Mary Ann sometimes took on work outside the home, such as reaping for nearby families. As well as the family routine revolving around farm work and household chores, for the children, there was also occasional schooling and church attendance. Some describe Peter as not a particularly good man, and his marriage to Mary Ann was marked by periods of discord and reconciliation. According to some neighbors, Peter had a, quote, ugly disposition. Peter's reputation was mixed. While some described him as a capable farmer and a man who could be a good neighbor, others noted his harsh language and tendency toward anger. Later testimony from their daughter Angelina and neighbors revealed frequent quarrels and at times violence. Angelina recounted in court that her father often beat her mother, sometimes with an ox whip, and had threatened her life on more than one occasion. She described a particularly violent incident just weeks before her mother's death when Peter attempted to choke Mary Ann, and only Angelina's intervention prevented it from going further. Despite these hardships, Mary Ann fulfilled her duties as a mother and wife, maintaining the household and caring for her children.
Looking back, Mike, domestic violence back then wasn't just common. It was really quite normalized in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Not everyone did it, but it's very normalized and sort of hidden under the guise of keeping house. You know what I mean? It's, and I think Angelina's testimony and what we'll hear through this is, she didn't just expose a murderer, right? I think she exposed the culture that excused cruelty behind closed doors in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, totally.
And she was almost called out for telling the truth about what was going on in her house.
Yeah, I mean, if you really think about it, back at this time, women didn't even have the right to vote. They didn't get that until 1918 here in Canada. So
I know.
After World War I.
Craziness.
Yeah.
Absolutely bonkers.
Family life was not without its moments of normalcy. Witnesses described seeing Mary Ann and Peter drive together to Bridgewater and other nearby towns, sometimes appearing to get along as any other couple might. There were periods when the household seemed to function peacefully, and Mary Ann was heard to say that, at times, they lived more happily together than before. However, these periods were often interrupted by renewed conflict, and Mary Ann had, on at least one occasion, packed her belongings and considered leaving, only to be coaxed into staying for the sake of the family's reputation. The tensions within the home shaped the children's lives. As the eldest, Angelina took on significant responsibility, especially when her mother was unwell or away. Teresa and Peter Jr. were younger and more sheltered from the worst disputes, but the instability was evident. In the weeks leading up to Mary Ann's death, the family's troubles seemed to intensify. Neighbors noted that Peter spoke dismissively of his wife, telling one that, quote, she is on her last legs, and that, quote, she will be going away from home now, and she'll be missing someday, and nobody will know what becomes of her, end quote. Mary Ann, meanwhile, continued her routine, planning to pick berries with Peter on the day she disappeared.
Yeah, this kind of casual, morbid foreshadowing isn't just eerie. It feels to me like it's a form of psychological distancing. So Peter's like laying the groundwork to dehumanize Mary Ann.
Right.
He's turning his wife into a storyline before she's even gone.
On the morning of the 11th of August, 1873, the Mailman household on Pleasant River Road in Lunenburg County, Nova Scotia, was marked by a sense of routine that belied the tragedy about to unfold. That day, Peter and Mary Ann planned to pick wild berries, an everyday summer activity in the rural community. Before leaving, Peter shut the hens up and locked the house with a padlock. Mary Ann prepared a basket for the outing, white with red stripes, while Peter took an axe, which he said was to clear brush or assist with the berry picking. Angelina watched her parents depart together, heading toward the brook near their property. She was standing outside and could see them distinctly as they left, her mother with the basket, her father with the axe. Angelina and her younger siblings, Teresa and Peter Jr., spent the afternoon picking pears nearby, as instructed by their mother. The last sighting of Mary Ann alive was around 1 p.m. when a neighbor, Daniel Carver, saw her tending to chores. Carver did not see Peter at the time, but later, around 3 p.m., he noticed Peter returning home from a different direction than where Mary Ann's body would eventually be found. Carver observed Peter kindling a fire on his property, possibly as part of clearing land, but did not see him carrying anything specific. When Angelina and her siblings returned to the house, they found it locked. With the help of their cousin, Albert Mailman, they managed to get inside by removing the hinge from the door. Albert, who had lived about a mile away, stayed with the children until Peter returned in the late afternoon. Peter came in carrying the same basket that Mary Ann had taken, now filled with wild berries, and the axe. Angelina was immediately unsettled by her father's return without her mother. When she asked where Mary Ann was, Peter replied that she had gone to Ben Baker's house, a neighbor, to work.
There's this whole thing, there's something eerie in how ordinary this day seems, right? He comes back, same basket, same act, same walk through the door, no urgency, no explanation, just kind of a man going through his motions as if the day hadn't totally ruptured, right?
Yep.
It's just eerie because it seems like it's a nice day outside,
Yeah.
And just, she's gone visiting the neighbors.
Yeah, she's just visiting somebody. It's okay. Whatever. She'll be back. Peter stayed in the house briefly and then went outside to set fire to some brush when Daniel Carver saw him. He returned before sunset and left after dark, claiming he was off to fetch Mary Ann from Ben Baker's. Peter's explanations for Mary Ann's absence changed over the following days. On Tuesday, he told Angelina that Ben Baker had hired her mother to reap for 2 weeks at $1 weekly. Witnesses later recalled seeing Peter on the afternoon of August 11th, returning from the woods with the basket and axe. Benjamin Fancy and Jacob Rafuse testified to seeing Peter carrying something on his shoulder, though they would not say for sure what it was. No one, however, saw Mary Ann after she left with Peter that day. The children, particularly Angelina, were deeply unsettled by their father's evasive answers and the growing realization that their mother was missing. By Thursday, Peter's behavior grew even more suspicious. He went to Bridgewater, taking with him an indigenous woman named Mary Glode, and returned with her and a few bottles of liquor. That same day, Ben Baker visited the house looking for Mary Ann. He told Angelina she had not been to his place since Sunday. This contradiction alarmed Angelina, who began to suspect something was terribly wrong. When she confronted her father, Peter suggested that Mary Ann might be at Waterloo with her family or somewhere else, further muddying the story. Meanwhile, neighbors and family members grew increasingly concerned as Mary Ann failed to turn up anywhere in the community. The alarm was raised, and a search for Mary Ann began in earnest, with neighbors and family scouring the woods and fields. On Friday, Peter left the house, taking his 2 youngest children and a wagon loaded with household goods, food, and clothing. Before departing, he wanted Angelina to keep quiet if constables came looking for him, ominously saying, quote, "If the constables got him, they would hang him, but they would hang his 2 children first," end quote. He told her to say he was at Waterloo looking for Mary Ann if anyone asked. As the search intensified, the community's suspicions focused squarely on Peter. Left alone and frightened, Angelina confided in relatives and neighbors about her fears. Numbering in the hundreds, the search party spent days combing the woods. It was not until August 21st, 10 days after she'd gone missing, that Mary Ann's body was discovered. The search party, led by Joseph Baker and George Ullman, followed tracks through the undergrowth and eventually came upon a fallen tree, its roots upturned and forming a natural hollow. They found Mary Ann's remains partially concealed beneath the roots and covered with moss and earth. The body had been forced into the cramped space head first, with her feet crowded in last. Only a portion of her dress and one stockinged foot were visible through the moss, and she wore no shoes or hat at the time of discovery.
You called this Beneath the Roots, and when I read this part, and when you're just saying it now, there's really something quite visceral about this. It wasn't just concealment.
Right.
It felt like burial by nature and intention, like beneath the roots. She was folded into a forest floor, like a secret that the land was being asked to keep.
Yeah.
It's not just, there's something, whoever placed her there, didn't just want her out of sight. They wanted her swallowed by the earth in a way, right? Yeah. And there's something deeply upsetting about that. It's not the violence, but this quietness of putting her body in here, tucking her under a tree.
Yeah.
That sort of just maybe tries to make it less real or something. I don't know.
I also read in a few newspaper articles, but I couldn't find it in court documents, how allegedly there were burn marks around the area heading off in 2 different directions, making it appear as though someone had set fire to the area to try and cover up things in that way as well. So, Yeah. The corpse's position was unnatural and cramped, quote, partially doubled up under the root of a tree that had been partly blown over, end quote. The care with which the body was hidden was noted by searchers and later by the court. The burial was described as showing, quote, great skill and ingenuity, end quote, with the moss and earth carefully arranged to disguise the grave. The spot was so well chosen that, as one searcher remarked, a person could easily pass by without noticing anything unusual. When the coroner and medical examiners arrived, they found Mary Ann still dressed in her gray woolen dress, chemise, drawers, and stockings. There were no signs that her clothing had been disturbed, and her underclothes were intact. The most shocking evidence of violence was found on her head. Examination revealed severe trauma. A large fracture at the back and base of the skull, with a piece of bone entirely detached and driven inward. There were also marks of other blows, including one over the eye and another on the side of her head. The wounds were consistent with having been inflicted by the blunt end of an axe, and medical testimony confirmed that the injuries would have caused instantaneous death. Blood was still oozing from the wounds when the body was first examined, despite the passage of days since her death. Decomposition had set in, but the body was relatively well preserved due to the cool, shaded spot where it had been hidden. Medical experts examined that life had been extinct for 10 or 11 days, matching the time since Mary Ann was last seen alive. There were no other wounds or signs of a struggle on her body, and no evidence of sexual assault. The absence of shoes and hat suggested that she had been attacked suddenly with little chance to defend herself or flee. The careful concealment of Mary Ann's body suggested both familiarity with the area and a desperate effort to hide the crime. Peter Mailman, the prime suspect in his wife's murder, was in the wind with his younger children. Investigators needed solid evidence that would either tie him to the crime or point to another killer. David Frauzel, Mary Ann's brother, and Joseph Baker told investigators they found trees nearby Mary Ann's burial site with distinctive cuts, 3 small gaps in each mark. These marks matched exactly the flaws in the blade of an axe found at Peter Mailman's home. A new search was on, this time for a potential killer, Peter Mailman. More after a quick break. And we are back. Matthew, thoughts on this more than 100-year-old case, 150-year-old case?
It's more than 150 years old, but I'm really thinking about Mary Ann, right? And she didn't just die. Her life was erased with just sort of silence and nonchalance. It's sort of terrifying. And, you know, what gets me is how ordinary it all was. So a man kills his wife, hides her like shame, tells the kids to lie. And it, you know what? That's not just 1873. That's now. You know, that's every woman who stayed because she's been told to, or because she's afraid, or because she thinks her kids she needs to hold her family together because of the kids. And it's breaking her apart, right? And, you know, Mary Ann wasn't stupid, she wasn't weak, and she was just trying to survive the only way she knew how until she couldn't anymore because she was murdered. And that's the part that I think makes every one of us sort of stop and feel something deep in our gut, right? Because we've also built a world still where women like her still disappear, right? Sometimes under roots, sometimes in plain sight.
Yeah.
And it's just sad that it's 150 years later, and I still have concern for so many women out there that are in domestic abuse situations.
Well, this is why I did this story. This is why I chose it. I chose it at first because, this is near where I grew up. Local. Yep. Near where I grew up. I'm familiar with a lot of the different places mentioned. But as I read, I could have put different dates on this, and it would have been the exact same story that we tell today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, domestic violence is domestic violence and has been forever.
Yeah.
The search for Peter Mailman stretched across Lunenburg County and eventually into other jurisdictions, with neighbors, constables, and relatives determined to bring him to justice. The search for the fugitive was led by Josiah Fancy and local constables who tracked him based on information that he had gone to stay with relatives in Greywood near Annapolis. Upon arrival at the house of Peter's brother George, the searchers encountered a man outside. They didn't realize at first this was Peter Mailman, the man they'd been chasing. Josiah Fancy later recalled how they'd gone to the house and saw a man standing outdoors without coat or hat. The man stood a while and then started toward the barn. Not realizing this was their suspect, they went inside and questioned George Mailman. And George said, yeah, Peter'd been here, but he'd gone away. The searchers left the house and soon realized they hadn't questioned the stranger who had entered the barn. It was too late to return that day, so they waited until the next morning. They went back to George Mailman's house, and Solomon Baker, one of the searchers, went in. And sure enough, there was Peter Mailman. The arrest itself was uneventful. Peter offered no resistance when confronted by Josiah Fancy and the constables. He rode back with the searchers in his own carriage, his children with him, never attempting to flee or protest his treatment. Peter's demeanor after his arrest was strikingly odd. According to reporter J.W. Longley, who visited Peter in his cell, quote, Mailman's conduct after his arrest was quite peculiar and bordered on the melodramatic. In general, affirming his innocence and affecting great love and regard for his murdered wife. Peter professed joy at the discovery of Mary Ann's body, telling those around him, quote, I thank God for this, and then adding, quote, I would sleep easier that night on account of the finding of his dear wife's body. End quote. During a conversation with Longley, Peter said, quote, I am a poor man, and I haven't much speech, but I am too honest for this thing, but I will meet it like a man. It is pretty hard to be here. They have got up everything against me, but I bear it all. I look up to God. I am too honest for this thing. End quote. When pressed further, he insisted, quote, They have got the wrong man. The right man has not been got yet. God has given me sense to say this one thing. End quote. At times, he turned the blame toward his daughter, Angelina, complaining that she had, quote, sworn falsely against him and attempted to discredit her character, suggesting her testimony against him was motivated by personal animosity and family strife. It's so frustrating to me that, here we are telling this story.
It's the same story.
152 years later, same stuff going on. The case had already become a sensation in Lunenburg County and beyond for both its brutality and the rarity of such a crime in Nova Scotia. As Longley noted in his writing, quote, more than a quarter of a century has passed since a case of willful murder has happened in the county of Lunenburg, and the present one is so shocking in all its features and details that it arouses the most intense interest. When Peter was brought to Lunenburg for trial, the courthouse was besieged by crowds. Quote, the rush was something perfectly awful. There seemed to be a mad surging of human beings, and as one after the other was wedged in, they rushed and scampered and scrambled for a place, wrote Longley. Quote, his lordship affirmed that he had never seen such unruly actions in all his long experience on the bench. Great crowds had to remain outside. End quote. The press covered every development, and public opinion was overwhelmingly against Peter, with many convinced of his guilt before the trial began. All eyes were on Peter Mailman in the courtroom as the trial started on October 17, 1873, at the Lunenburg courthouse. Thanks to the jailer, Peter wore a decent suit of clothes and appeared anxious but composed. Presiding over the trial was Judge DeBar, Honorable John Creighton, Q.C., and W.H. Owen, Esquire, representing the Crown, while Honorable H.A.N. Callback, Q.C., defended Peter Mailman.
I can imagine in a place where murders are rare, the courtroom in a small town kind of becomes a stage where justice has to be performed. Because you've seen this, Mike, in a smaller town. The crowd's hunger often isn't just for truth, it's for the spectacle. To make sense of the horror, right? And it always, whenever there's a big case in a small town like this, it feels almost like a play in a way that everybody's watching,
Yep. For want of a better term, at this time, these kind of court cases were entertainment for people.
Mm.
People are still fascinated by people doing bad things to each other. I mean, this podcast wouldn't exist were it not for that.
Half the stuff I watch on streaming services wouldn't either, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's that about? What's that fascination about? I still wonder. When the indictment was read, accusing Peter of, quote, feloniously, willfully, and of his malice aforethought killing and murdering one Mary Ann Mailman, the wife of said Peter Mailman, he answered in a clear, firm voice, I am innocent as an unborn babe. Still, throughout the proceedings, his behavior was marked by nervousness and a tendency to evade direct questions about his guilt. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on circumstantial evidence as there was no eyewitness to the murder. Crichton opened by urging the jury to judge only according to the evidence, emphasizing the rarity and gravity of the crime. Quote, this was not an ordinary case of taking of life in the heat of passion. This man is charged with willfully and in cold blood murdering his wife, whom he had promised to love and protect. End quote. He acknowledged the lack of direct evidence, but argued that, quote, in most cases of conviction, circumstantial evidence is deemed sufficient, end quote. The prosecution set out to show that Peter's behavior, his shifting stories, the physical evidence, and the timeline all pointed to his guilt. The defense attorney Callback countered with passionate appeals to both law and emotion. He argued that the case was built on, quote, the very worst evidence that can be produced against any man. It is entirely circumstantial, each particle of which may be fallible, and yet you are asked upon such evidence to launch this man into eternity and a felon's grave. End quote. Callback attacked the credibility of the prosecution's key witnesses, especially Peter and Mary Ann's eldest daughter, Angelina, insisting that the lack of a clear motive and the absence of direct proof should weigh heavily in the jury's deliberations. Callback also criticized the public and press for prejudicing the case, warning the jury against being swept up in the, quote, thirst for the prisoner's conviction, end quote, and the, quote, fury of thousands of people, end quote. Angelina Mailman's role as a witness was central and contentious. On the stand, she recounted the events of August 11th, her parents' history of quarrels and violence, and her father's suspicious actions and contradictory explanations after her mother disappeared. She described seeing her parents leave together, her mother with a basket, her father with an axe, and her father returning home alone, offering shifting stories about Mary Ann's whereabouts. Angelina also testified to previous threats and violence, including an incident where she had intervened as Peter tried to choke Mary Ann. The defense subjected her to a grueling cross-examination, seeking to undermine her credibility by questioning her character, her relationships, and her motives, even suggesting she was, quote, a perjured wretch beneath brutes of the lowest type, end quote.
Angelina wasn't just a witness. To me, she feels like the moral center of this case.
Yeah.
Right? In a time when girls were told to stay quiet, she stood up and told the truth, knowing it would cost her whatever family she had left. Right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine like a young woman, right? Back then, telling the truth, how many people would have been after her?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She's the moral center of this.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's got to be. I've seen cases like this before where, you know, the person who is essentially the main witness and is so close to both the victim and the alleged perpetrator,
mm-hmm.
That they become a pariah in a way. You know,
yeah.
people look at them like she's sort of a betrayer in the defense's eyes. It's like, come on. Her mother is dead.
And she's telling the truth.
Right. Yeah. The challenges faced by both sides further complicated the trial. The defense complained that key witnesses were missing or intimidated, that the two youngest Mailman children were kept from them until the judge intervened, and that the public's prejudgment made a fair trial nearly impossible. The prosecution, meanwhile, pressed the jury to see the totality of the evidence as overwhelming, even if each piece alone might seem inconclusive. Testimony continued over several days, with neighbors, family, and medical experts called to the stand. The emotional toll was evident. Angelina broke down in tears, and the testimony of 11-year-old Teresa Mailman moved many in the courtroom to weep. Peter Mailman, for his part, remained largely impassive throughout, eating crackers as his daughter described the last day she saw her mother alive.
So this moment, snacking through your daughter's trauma, starts to strip away any claim of innocence, really, in a way, doesn't it? Like it's not just inappropriate, it feels sociopathic to me.
Yeah, it's gross.
And the act of eating becomes, in its own way, almost like a silent confession.
You can just, you can just hear, there's this silence in the courtroom after the daughter says something horrible, and you just hear, meow, 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 meow. Ugh.
Yeah.
The defense's closing arguments were long and impassioned, filled with biblical references, legal precedents, and pleas for mercy. Callback reminded the jury that, quote, "The law presumes him innocent. He comes before you as such. You must confirm the law or take the responsibility of convicting him on evidence of the very worst character," end quote. Callback argued that the absence of a clear motive, reliance on circumstantial evidence, and the questionable credibility of key witnesses should all lead to acquittal. He concluded with an emotional appeal, quote, "Let the sight of his dear helpless little children, whom you now see clinging with their arms around his neck, plead for him. They have lost a mother. Would you deprive them now of a father's love and a father's protection?" End quote. The most significant physical evidence against Peter Mailman was the axe. Witnesses, including Mary Ann's brother David Frauzel and Joseph Baker, testified to finding trees near the burial site with distinctive cuts, 3 small gaps in each mark, matching flaws in the blade of the axe found in Peter's home. The axe was brought into court and compared to the wood, causing a sensation among those present. Joseph Baker stated, quote, "Got this axe in prisoner's chipyard. Observed little gaps on it. Axe now in the same condition as when I found it. The corner has been blunted a little. The flaws in the cuts would be caused by gaps in the axe. The axe, when I first saw it in the yard, would make gaps like those in the piece of wood." End quote. Tracks in the woods also played a crucial role. Searchers Joseph Baker and George Ullman described finding the tracks of a man and a woman leading to the swampy area where Mary Ann's body was found. After the body's discovery, only a single set of tracks, a man's, was seen leaving the site. Josiah Fancy, who helped apprehend Peter, noted that the tracks matched Peter's boots, which had distinctive nail patterns and a partially missing heel. However, the defense challenged this evidence, arguing that other witnesses had not seen such marks and that the tracks could have belonged to anyone seeking wild pears in the area. Mary Ann's clothing and the circumstances of her burial, as well as the details of her fatal injuries and timeline of her death, were presented as I described earlier. To summarize, she was found in her gray woolen dress and underclothes, concealed with great care beneath a fallen tree, and her body showed clear signs of fatal blows to the head consistent with the use of a blunt instrument, probably an axe, with death occurring roughly 10 or 11 days before her discovery. The rest of the prosecution's case focused on the following circumstantial details. 1. Peter and Mary Ann were last seen leaving together, he with the axe, she with the basket. 2. Peter returned alone, with inconsistent explanations for his wife's absence. 3. He left the area with his 2 young children, warning Angelina not to alert the authorities. 4. The axe found at his home matched cuts on the trees near the burial site. And 5. Tracks leading to and from the site matched the boots that Peter wore. The defense did their best to highlight contradictions in the circumstantial evidence, and as we mentioned, tried to downplay or outright discredit Angelina's detailed testimony. The defense also pointed out that other witnesses such as Daniel Carver and Albert Mailman offered testimony that was either inconsistent or failed to implicate Peter directly. Medical witnesses admitted that another blunt instrument could have caused the fatal wounds and that decomposition rates might vary. The defense also emphasized the lack of a clear motive, arguing that no evidence had been presented to explain why Peter would kill his wife. They pointed to testimony from the neighbors that the couple had sometimes lived harmoniously and that Peter had made plans to travel to Greywood before Mary Ann's disappearance, suggesting he had not fled to avoid detection. The jury, made up entirely of local men, was left to weigh the totality of the circumstances, the credibility of witnesses, and the plausibility of the defense's arguments, knowing that their decision would mean life or death for Peter Mailman. The jurors were instructed to consider whether the circumstantial evidence presented by the Crown was strong enough to overcome the presumption of innocence and justify a guilty verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. After 3/4 of an hour, the jury returned to the courtroom. The verdict was delivered in silence. Peter Mailman was found guilty of the willful murder of his wife, Mary Ann Frauzel Mailman. The courtroom, packed with spectators, was gripped by relief, sorrow, and grim satisfaction. The judge pronounced the sentence of death by hanging, as was the law for murder at the time. Peter Mailman's reaction to the verdict was notable for its mixture of stoicism and melodrama. Throughout the trial, he'd maintained an air of anxious composure, punctuated by dramatic declarations of innocence and self-pity. When the sentence was passed, he did not break down, but continued to insist on his innocence. Quote, "I am as innocent as an unborn babe," he declared, echoing the plea he had made at his arraignment.
Yeah, so his final performance is what I'm calling this, right? Perhaps less about justice and more about legacy control for him, right?
Right.
And I think maybe, he wanted to die remembered a wronged man, not a guilty one, right? And I think he's, again, Mike, we've seen this. He's trying to write his narrative over all of this at this point. I know it was circumstantial, blah, 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 it was a long time ago, but I kind of just get the sense that he did this one,
You get the sense, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, like he's a wife abuser, horrible human being. Nothing led up to me thinking he would have been innocent of this.
Right. In the days following Peter's conviction, J.W. Longley, the special reporter, observed Peter's behavior in his cell. He wrote, quote, "I could easily observe the twitching, nervous movements of the man. He would get absorbed in every thought now and again and rub his knuckles together and play with his fingernails while a look of intense anxiety would come over his face." End quote. Despite his public protestations of innocence, Peter Mailman eventually made a partial confession. According to Longley's account, Peter admitted in a private conversation that there had been a struggle in the woods and that he had struck Mary Ann. Still, he insisted it was not premeditated murder. He claimed the blow was delivered in the heat of the moment and not meant to kill. Nevertheless, the confession did not absolve him in the eyes of the law or the community. It only confirmed the grim reality of Mary Ann's violent death.
Listen, if you're abusive to your partner over years, you don't give me the heat of the moment stuff. You are an ongoing abuser. It was only a matter of time.
Right.
Right? It's like this heat of the moment. Oh, I would never have hurt her otherwise. Right? Bullshit. That's proven wrong from what your own kids are saying.
In the weeks leading up to his execution, Peter Mailman made at least one attempt to escape from jail. Details of the effort are sparse, but it is recorded that he tried to break free from his cell, only to be quickly apprehended by the jailer and guards. The escape attempt added a final note of desperation to his story and reinforced the public perception of his guilt and dangerousness.
Yeah. How many people try to escape? That sounds sort of very half-assed, the way. like it didn't sound like he did any mastermind. Maybe he saw an open door and just tried to do a runner, and they just grabbed the back of his collar, right?
That's probably exactly what happened. The execution of Peter Mailman was carried out following the law and with considerable public attention. On the appointed day, a large crowd gathered outside the jail, eager to witness or at least be present for the culmination of the notorious case. Hangings were still public events in Nova Scotia at the time, and the Mailman execution drew spectators from across the region. The procedure was somber and methodical. Peter was brought out dressed in a plain suit and led to the gallows. He was allowed to make a final statement in which he once more protested his innocence and invoked God's judgment on those who had condemned him. Quote, "The man that takes my life for this will have no peace on this earth afterwards, and I don't believe he will ever get to heaven at last." "I tell you, they have got the wrong man," he declared, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd.
Well, you know, I'm not for capital punishment, but at the same time, like, this just shows somebody who is telling everyone what God will think, telling everyone what the person carrying out the court's rules against him because he murdered his wife would think. You know, it's about everybody else, not him.
Other people is who he should be talking about. It's like, oh my God, to my children, can you ever forgive me for taking your mother from you? And now
he doesn't care.
Yeah, he was probably some narcissistic thing. I don't think narcissism as a disorder was even considered at that time, but it certainly sounds like it was a thing.
Craziness.
Yeah. The execution itself was swift. With the drop of the trapdoor, Peter Mailman's life ended, and the community that the murder and trial had so shaken began to process the aftermath. Reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others, moved by the defense's passionate arguments and Peter's protestations, wondered if the right man had truly paid the ultimate price. Some even questioned whether his partial confession had been somehow coerced. The case left a deep mark on Lunenburg County. The children of Peter and Mary Ann were left orphaned, their lives forever altered by the violence and scandal that had engulfed their family. The trial and execution became a cautionary tale, cited in later years as a grim example of domestic tragedy, the dangers of circumstantial evidence, and the irreversible consequences of capital punishment. As J.W. Longley reflected, quote, "The details of the murder of Mrs. Mailman by her husband are unusually horrible. A more atrocious murder is not on record in this country. If his confession is to be believed, the case is slightly modified. But the facts in evidence stamp the deed as a most cowardly, heinous murder." End quote. The story of Peter and Mary Ann Mailman has passed into local legend, a reminder of the darkness that can sometimes lie hidden beneath the surface of ordinary lives. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 365, Beneath the Roots, the murder of Mary Ann Frauzel Mailman.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
Let's take a listen to our first voicemail of the week.
Hey, I'm Dylan Owen. I love the show. I got fired from my job. Go shit in your hat.
Oh, Dylan. Oh,
Dylan,
man.
I hope you didn't get fired for listening to the show.
Well, that I really hope. But so Dylan Owen got fired from his job. What was he doing, Matthew? What kind of job was he doing and where?
I don't know. Well, I don't know. You know what? He got fired for his job, so I'm going to say it's a crappy job that he didn't want anyway.
Right. And where is he from?
Stratford.
So he's from Stratford, close by to where you grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is he hoping to move into? He's probably got some training or a hobby somewhere that he really enjoys now.
You know, I think he's going to be like the next, what do you call him? Jackie Chan. He's like a martial arts movie guy. Martial arts action star is what Dylan's going to be doing next.
Okay. Yeah. So he's going to like crash through the front of bus windows when they stop.
Stuff like that.
That's great.
I love a good martial arts film, Mike.
Me too. So I really do.
Dylan, go for it.
Yeah. Do it up, Dylan.
Do it up.
And we're hoping that your unemployment does not last long.
You know what, Dylan? You're in good company. There's a lot of that amongst friends and family right now. So you're not the only one, my friend.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our next voicemail.
Hey, Mike and Matt, it's Lane again. Lane is actually not short for anything. Just L-A-Y-N-E. My mom likes to say, it's like Wayne, but with an L. And fun fact, she also wanted to name me Kirby, but my dad essentially said absolutely not. And that's how I ended up with the name Lane, because that was my mom's second choice in names that my dad would actually agree to, because Kirby was not okay with him, which I don't know why my mom would think it was a good name for me anyways, because they had a Kirby vacuum cleaner at the time. And being a millennial, that would have been just a bunch of torment going through school, since there's a Kirby character in Mario. So yeah, dodged a bullet on that one. Thank you, Dad. And fairly close with where I am originally from. I was born in Ontario, but about 30 minutes outside of Niagara Falls. So Goderich is about 3 hours from where I was born, and about an hour and a half from where my family actually lives. But I now live in North Carolina. And sometimes I feel like I should be a professional merge coach, because where I live, no one seems to be able to drive. But I actually work in special education, and my job title is actually job coach. I work with special education teachers. I'm working on compliance and paperwork. Thanks. Have a good day.
Well, thanks for calling back, Lane, and clarifying. That's great. And Lane, like Wayne with an L.
So, but I'm also seeing a trend in her parents' naming structures.
Okay.
Lane, it's like a street. Kirby on the curb.
Yeah.
Like I think were your parents fascinated with sort of streets and roads,
infrastructure,
infrastructure? So this time I'm going to make Lane a urban planner.
Well, there you go. So when she's not doing helping special education kids find work, she's doing that. I did something related to that many years ago. I worked at an after-school program where we prepared kids with special needs to someday apply for jobs and things like that. It was quite a fun thing. We did mock job interviews and all that kind of stuff, and I remember those days fondly. They were tough, but they were good, you know.
That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome.
Well, let us move on to PayPal and donut money donors. First up, we have a new patron. And her name is Victoria Hames, Hames, and she is from Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I'm sure the flies are going to be coming out soon. What do you think Victoria Hames does there in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Matthew?
I think that insurance. Victoria works in insurance.
Okay. She works in insurance. Is there a particular type? Is it home, auto, pet, or all of the above?
It's Sunny Day Insurance.
Sunny Day Insurance. Okay.
Yeah. So it's for the days where you're going to have a picnic, or you're going to be running a marathon, or there's something that really has to happen outdoors, and or like an outdoor wedding, and if it rains and ruins it, that's the type of insurance she handles. Just that, was it a rainy or a sunny day?
There you go.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Victoria. Much appreciated. Next, we have somebody whose last name is exactly like their first name. It's Descato, and they are from Auburn, Washington, just there below us. They're in Auburn, Washington State. And what do you think Descato does there in Auburn, Washington, Matthew?
Descato.
Yeah. And it's spelled EAUX as well, so it's quite Francais.
Descato.
Yes.
They're in a band.
There you go.
It's like Tony. It's Descato. There's two of them.
Tony.
So Descato, there were actually two people sent this to us, Descato and Descato. They got together and created a band.
Oh, okay. That's great.
You
That's
remember
awesome.
Tony, don't you?
I absolutely do. I used to play that going in my car all the way to my girlfriend's place in New Germany.
Tony, Descato.
So they're in a band. Great. Thank you, Descato. Next up, we have Adam Grofsick. I don't know where Adam's from, but Adam says, you guys are one of my guilty pleasures. Sending you some donut money in honor of Mon Oncle Ray. He worked on White Alice, which occurred at the same time as the Dew Project, the Distant Early Warning Project.
Okay.
My first name is Celeste. Can't wait to hear thoughts on how I make a living. Okay, so we will just say, I will go back and I say, okay, we have something from Celeste here. So how did Celeste make a living, Matthew? Very interesting.
First of all, I love the name Celeste.
Me too. It's very celestial.
I think Celeste is a high priestess.
Oh, very nice. In some sort of darker occulty thing?
No, she's a priestess of light.
Well, there you go. That's very nice.
Yeah, she's in Montreal, city of Spires, right? So
okay.
Her religion took over an old Catholic church, and so she's the high priestess of her own religion.
Interesting.
But it's all it's not a cult. It's a very positive, happy religion.
A very positive and happy religion. Yeah. Well, that's nice. We need more of those.
They only do good.
They only do good.
They only help.
Okay, good. It's all about love. It's not about like everybody except you. Except you over there. We love everybody
peace,
except you.
Helping people, feeding the needy.
Yeah.
Clothing the naked. Yeah. Petting the dogs. Yeah.
Going to the zoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. Ooh, that's probably one of the more high-minded jobs I've ever given.
It is very much.
High priestess.
High priestess. I want to be a high priestess at some point. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for Dark Poutine. So until next time, Matthew's still laughing about my comment about wanting to be a high priestess.
Oh dear. As you would say.
Don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Channel your inner priestesses of light.
Right.